Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore, a former Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore, and also a former President of the United Nations Security Council. Ambassador Mahbubani, welcome to ThePrint.
Happy to join you.
Thank you so much. But let me just start by saying that you're in Singapore, I'm in Delhi, and you have written several books, but I see the latest one called Has China Won right there on your bookshelf.
Right.
Earlier, I think it probably came out early in the pandemic, so I hope it's doing
well. Actually, the pandemic killed the sales.
well. Well,
because
now
you know why? The bookshops were closed for at least 6 months after the book came out. So the sales have not been good, but the balance, that the critical attention has been good. So I'm more interested in the critical attention than in the sales.
Well, I think in a country like ours, in India, a book like that will, I'm sure, attract a lot of eyeballs because, as you know, two things are happening. One is that China is sitting on Indian territory in Ladakh, and the other is that India has refused to join the RCEP, which is the regional bloc of 15 countries led by China. So my first question to you, why do you think, so what is your view of India not joining the RCEP?
Well, to be honest with you, I feel very sad because in my view, India is missing out on an enormous opportunity by not joining the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, because we have learned in the last 30 to 40 years is that the countries that open up and sign free trade agreements and join free trade agreements do well, and the countries that don't open up and don't sign free trade agreements don't do well. There's a direct correlation. So if you want to attain economic growth and prosperity, comes from liberalizing the economy. And I'm not the one saying this, but Professor Jagdish Bhagwati of Columbia University has said this very clearly and categorically. And if you want data, there's so much data. And I want to emphasize
the fear in India is that India will be flooded with cheap Chinese goods. When tariff barriers are lowered, then that's what is going to happen, isn't it?
How do you say, send cheap Indian goods to China? The Chinese market is so much bigger than the Indian market, much bigger. And I would encourage India to do a simple comparison. Okay, in the 70s, in the 1980s, the Indian economy was, in terms of competitiveness, the same as the Southeast Asian economies, right? Like Indonesia, like Thailand, and look at Vietnam. Vietnam was still fighting a war, right, in the 1980s. And look at these economies. Why have they grown so much, right? From a relatively similar level of development. And why is it a country like Indonesia, which is frankly, whose economy is not as competitive as the Indian economy, ready to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership?
But one big difference, of course, is that India has 1.2 billion people. I mean, Singapore is 5 million. That's less than Kailash colony where I live, which is a really tiny part of Delhi. But so when you have 1.2 billion people in varying stages of economic growth, then suppose Prime Minister Modi has to look at the big picture, right? He cannot just the small picture.
Then you see, the comparison you should make is with the ASEAN countries. The ASEAN population is 650 million. It's half India's population. But what is interesting is that half of India's population, with countries that were in economic terms as developing as India, have an economy about the same size as India. Why is that so? And Southeast Asian countries, Southeast Asia was known as the Balkans of Asia. Southeast Asia was known as a country where you had dominoes about to fall. Southeast Asian countries were not known as these strong, dynamic economies like Japan or South Korea. They were known as weak developing states, right?
Mhm.
Why have these weak developing states in Southeast Asia, which are, by the way, cultural offshoots of India, okay? As you know, out of the, in my book, The ASEAN Miracle, I describe in great detail how out of the 10 Southeast Asian countries, 9 have an Indic culture.
Right.
And I can tell you, some years ago, when the Philippines, which is one of the largest Christian Catholic countries in the world, when they hosted the East Asian Summit, for the show for all the East Asian leaders, they put on the Mahabharata. Can you imagine that the world's almost largest Catholic country
Yeah.
puts on the Mahabharata as a performance for visiting leaders like the American president, Chinese president? Now, what does that show? It shows there's a deep cultural affinity between India and Southeast Asia. So, if your cultural offshoots of India can compete and do well, India can do even better. And one point I always emphasize, the most competitive animal in the world is the Indian animal. Because every society in the world, the most successful community is the Indian community. You
So
look at you.
how has ASEAN reacted to this, India's refusal to join RCEP?
Sorry?
How has ASEAN reacted to India's refusal?
Well, I must say, to be honest with you, with deep disappointment. And I'll tell you why. For obvious reasons. ASEAN also has to counterbalance China. And India would have been a good counterbalance to China. And frankly, if you are looking at the end of the day, how to manage a China that has grown so big and so powerful, it's good to be in a club where you have Japan, South Korea, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, India. And guess what? It has an effect on how China will react with the rest of the world, depending on how his neighbors talk to it. And the advantage of being in RCEP, and I was a diplomat for 33 years, and I can tell you, I attended my first ASEAN meeting in 1971, almost 50 years ago. There was so much distrust among the ASEAN countries, incredible amount of distrust. But 30 years later, 20 years later, when I became the Foreign Secretary of Singapore, as Foreign Secretary, I led the Singapore senior officials delegations to ASEAN meetings. The trust had grown, the distrust had evaporated. So this is the advantage of joining multilateral institutions. So by India joining the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, India could have influenced the directions of East Asia and to some extent also be influenced positively by East Asia. So
But
it's not
Ambassador,
about economics, it's about the club you belong to.
Let me ask you this. I mean, the Chinese are sitting on Indian territory, have been for the last 6 or 7 months in Ladakh. You know that Indian and Chinese soldiers may not be eyeball to eyeball, but they're separated by, 200 or 300 meters. Now, how do you expect India to be part of a big trading organization when the other big power, China, is sitting on your own territory?
I want to mention India's problems with China are serious but fairly recent. Vietnam has been a neighbor of China for 2,000 years.
Right.
Vietnam was occupied by China for 1,000 years. Vietnam fought a war with China more recently than India has. There were at least 500,000 Vietnamese soldiers fighting 500,000 Chinese soldiers in the 1979 war. India has not had that big a war, right? Until 1979, one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world was the Vietnam-China border. You want to talk of difficulties with China? Ask the Vietnamese. Now, fast forward today.
Yeah.
Which country is the #1 trading partner of Vietnam? It's China. And
Right.
by the way, Vietnam claims that China is occupying islands that belong to Vietnam in the South China Sea.
Mhm.
So I'm telling you all this because in geopolitics, if you think there's a perfect black and white solution, there's no such thing in geopolitics. You have to learn to live with imperfections. So the Vietnamese are obviously very unhappy with what China is doing in the South China Sea to them. But at the same time, they want to grow their economy, and they said, "Okay, I'll put this aside. I'll focus on growing the economy." So, one thing about Indians is that they expect the world to be black and white. It is not black and white.
Why do you say
Everybody, everybody, and because that we all learn to live and work with countries that we may not necessarily like or agree with, because
no,
that's the
but
way life.
why do you say that Prime Minister Modi is likes the world to be black and white, or why does India like the world to be black and white?
I didn't say Prime Minister Modi likes it.
India,
Right.
India. That's right.
Let's be clear. And by the way, the one leader who has spent more time with Xi Jinping than any other leader is Prime Minister Modi.
That's
I give him a lot of credit for that. And indeed, when my Indian friends told me, he said, Kishore, there's no leader, no two leaders in the world have spent as much time together as Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping have. You look at it mathematically. So I don't say that about Prime Minister Modi. Now, like on the border question, let me tell you, I'm not an expert, okay? I don't know the details, but I do know that Prime Minister Modi has said categorically, okay, on record, that there are no Chinese forces on Indian territory. He has said that. So the question is, if Prime Minister Modi says it, I believe it, right?
right. So, so in that case, it's a bit of an impasse, isn't it? We know that,
Yes.
whether or not Prime Minister Modi was trying to finesse the situation because there are probably talks, ongoing talks with the Chinese on this question. There is a difference about the border, the line of actual control. I mean, all that aside. But the question is, at the moment, there is an impasse. How does
Well,
one?
there has been an impasse for a long time. And as when I was dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, every year we would invite senior retired Indian officials and senior retired Chinese officials to come and talk in the Lee Kuan Yew School. And by the way, the net result is something you should really ask your viewers to look at. Look at this. The Routledge Handbook of India-China Relations. See how thick it is?
Right.
And the reason I tell you why this is important is because this is a very complex relationship, and some of the world's best professors. This book just came out 2-3 months ago, by the way. And it is a very complex relationship. There are many dimensions to it. Don't just focus on one dimension. The border clearly is a problem. And as you know, and this is what Indians told me, at least 3 times the Chinese leaders, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, proposed to India and said, we are not going to change the border. Why don't we accept the line of control and live with it? And as you know, this is a fact. India did not accept that offer.
But in
So
April,
there were opportunities in the past to deal with this. And I still believe that there are ways and means of dealing with border disputes.
and a
But at
little
the
bit
same
of an
time, you must, in a complex relationship like this,
yeah.
you don't hold everything hostage to one issue.
I think a little bit of an update on those earlier proposals between, say, Deng Xiaoping and Rajiv Gandhi, or Zhou Enlai and Nehru, even before, is that in 2005, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister of India, there was an agreement of guiding principles, is that how to resolve the border between the two
That's
countries.
right.
But
That's
then
right.
a couple of years later, the Chinese withdrew from that. And subsequently, there has been, keep having these talks between special representatives, but nothing comes of it. The Chinese refuse to even exchange maps.
Yeah.
So if you don't even exchange maps, then how are you going to resolve something as complex as this?
Yeah, as I told you, Jyoti, I am not an expert on the China-India border issue.
Yeah, but you
And
do know
if you want to talk to an expert, Kanti Bajpai, the editor of this volume, is
Yes.
amazing in his knowledge. And you're right. I agree with you that the Chinese have made mistakes. I mean, I have no question whatsoever in the management of the border issue. But I'm saying, only point I'm making is that there are hundreds of issues between China and India. And you got to focus on the whole picture and not on one dimension, and which is why I gave the example of Vietnam. Vietnam is very unhappy with China and about the way its islands are occupied, but at the same time, it doesn't hold that entire relation hostage because of one issue.
So in that sense, when you said that the ASEAN is deeply disappointed, so India's, Act East policy, that also then comes under some stress, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, what I liked about the difference between the Look East policy and the Act East policy was that I like the word act rather than look. Acting is better than looking.
Sure.
So, but the tragedy is that India has not done much in terms of its Act East policy. And by the way, India will be welcomed with open arms in Southeast Asia. And, by the way, you should know this, Southeast Asians love India. So it's important for Indians to know this, but you got to do much more. And one, if you don't mind, I'll make a difficult point to you. India is right when it says when you sign free trade agreement, you get a range of cheap imports, right? But that's also part of what economic free market theory is all about. You must have creative destruction. Without creative destruction, you don't have economic growth. So if you want to preserve your current industries, which are uncompetitive, then you are actually hobbling up your own economy. So, but when you open up, when you sign free trade agreements, there are other markets that open up, and other new industries come up. And what is shocking is that Indians in the United States are setting up new companies faster than anybody else in the United States is, and Indians in India cannot set up new companies as fast as Indians overseas. Why is that the case, right? So I would, Indians can succeed. I mean, my first book was called Can Asians Think? And I can tell you at the end of the day, competition is about cultural confidence. You must say, I can compete. And that's what the Indians have shown anywhere in the world. I mean, look at Singapore. I'm amazing how well the Indians have done. You're only 15% of the population. Yeah, amazingly successful, right?
Yeah, sometimes Singapore is known as India's cleanest city because it has such a large, population of expatriates who live there. But
no, more than that. A friend of mine who was a very successful Indian entrepreneur in United States wanted to go back and live in India. So he said Calcutta, Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai. He looked at all the cities and he decided the best city in India is Singapore. That is what he said. He said, I can fly from Singapore to any Indian city more effectively because I can get to the airport in 10 minutes in Singapore, right? Mumbai, I don't know how long it takes. I can get to the airport in 10 minutes, 1 hour, boom, I'm flying already to India. So,
but let me come back. Yeah.
But functionally, India is an Indian, Singapore is an Indian city.
That's right. So let me ask you, Ambassador Mahbubani. You know China well. I mean, this latest book of yours and earlier as well. Now, how do the Chinese look at India? Two big powers, two Asian powers. Now, there's been a lot of sort of criticism about China of it having this Middle Kingdom complex. That we are the Dadas, we are the emperors. So how do they look at a democracy like ours?
Well, I think China would love to live in peace with India for another 2,000 years. Because, I mean, for most of the 2,000 years, when India first emerged as a great civilization and China emerged as a great civilization, the Chinese regard Indian civilization as one that is equal to Chinese civilization. And they have a lot of respect for Indian civilization.
But
So
they
for
don't
both,
want to live but they don't want to live as equals, surely. They
oh,
want to.
they'd be happy. They'd be happy to live as equals. And it's funny. It's funny you should say that, because as to the best of my knowledge, I may be mistaken about some of the South Indian kingdoms. They may have paid tribute to China, but by and large, India has never paid tribute to China. Whereas, by the way, Vietnam has paid tribute to China. The Southeast Asian countries have paid tribute to China. Korea has paid tribute to China. Japan, in a very different, subtle way, has paid tribute to China. So I don't understand why Indians are obsessed about this question of paying tribute to China, because you never pay tribute to China. But at the end of the day, the most important thing that India needs to do is to go back to 1980. Now, what do I mean by 1980? In 1980, the size of the Indian economy was the same size as the Chinese economy.
Right.
Same, 40 years ago, it's exactly same size. 40 years later, China's economy is 5 times bigger. Now, I would say that if you really want to compete in this game, make your economy 5 times bigger. And you can do that. Because you know why? The reason why you can do that is that you have 1.3 billion very talented Indians around the world. They be dying. And you know what is shocking about India being frightened to open up its economy to compete? Actually, the rest of the world should be frightened of 1.3 billion Indians. Because 1.3 billion Indians, if you look at what 1 million Indians have done in California, it's amazing, right? And you know that if Indians in India can achieve half the per capita income, right, of Indians in United States, you would have by far the world's largest economy, by far.
But I want to ask you about Xi Jinping. I mean, he is a very powerful leader. He's made himself the president for life in a sense. Now, how would somebody like him, so powerful, his sending his troops across the long border that he has with India, doesn't he understand that this would upset Indians, and that basically that 1.2 billion Indians are now deeply distrustful of his country? I mean, that was.
As I said once again, on the border issue, I do not know the facts.
Isn't it common sense that somebody do this?
But I can tell you that Xi Jinping really wanted to work out a long-term understanding with India, and I can tell you that I'm pretty sure that Xi Jinping has a lot of respect for Prime Minister Modi, genuine respect. And I think that's why the two of them were able to get along each other. And you're right when you say that Xi Jinping is a strong leader, but I would say that Narendra Modi is also a very strong leader in India. So it's not a case of a strong leader against a weak leader. There are two strong leaders here, Xi Jinping and Modi. And if you ask me what should happen now, I think they should try and resume the conversations that they had in the past and try and find out what went wrong. From what I'm told, there was an accident. Nobody wanted this to happen, right? From what I'm told, and these accidents happened because they came too close. So this Kanti Bajpai wrote, and I started something called the Asian Peace Program at the National University of Singapore, and I'm the coordinator of it. And the first essay was written by Kanti Bajpai soon after the border incident. He said the reason why the accident happened is because the Indian and Chinese soldiers had to meet face to face with each other to figure out.
The Galwan clash in June that you're talking about.
That's right. That's right. So he says, why not take away the soldiers, put virtual sensors in at all the sensitive points, and both sides have a common set of computers looking at the same sensors, and the computers will then talk to each other and say, why are you in this? Why are you in that? And there's no more physical confrontations at the border. So you can use technology to solve some of these problems. And by the way, there are things called best practices in other difficult borders, that also the India-China border is not the only difficult border in the world. There are other borders, and you can learn best practices from other borders. And I would say Kanti Bajpai's suggestion is an excellent suggestion that should be taken seriously by both China and India.
So could do a couple of questions, Ambassador. The first is that the squad that has come into shape, which is India, Australia, Japan, and Korea. Now, how does China look at these? I'm sorry, India, US, Japan, and Australia. Sorry about that. How does the US look at this squad, especially when the world's most powerful country, the Americans, are very much part of it, part of it, and expanding into this maritime domain?
Well, I mean, the one lesson I've learned in geopolitics is that no country, no great power will sacrifice its own interests for another power. So, for example, if the United States reaches a new understanding with China, right?
Under the new administration.
Yeah, the Biden administration, and if the United States has to sacrifice other countries, he will do so. There's no such thing as friendship. And if you want to know, ask any country what friendship with the United States is like, ask Pakistan. In the Cold War, Sabine Brzezinski went to the border and said, "We Pakistanis, Afghans, and in the United States, we are together," and so on and so forth. They were very close, very close. The Cold War ended, Pakistan was dropped. Boom! And then 9/11 happened. Oh, boom! Pakistan became a friend again.
Right.
So geopolitics is a cruel business. It has nothing to do with sentiment, nothing to do with love, nothing to do with values, nothing to do with ideology. It only has to do with interests.
Right.
And where there's convergence of interest, there'll be cooperation. So, and for example, you mentioned the Quad. I think Australia is going through a very difficult time, as you know. And I suspect that Australia will go through a more difficult time in the coming months because Australia unwisely decided to slap China in the face by calling for an international public inquiry into what China did on COVID-19. It's true, China made mistakes on COVID-19, no question whatsoever. But you want to ask for something, do it quietly. Don't embarrass China publicly. But by slapping China in the face, they made China lose face. And for Chinese and Asians, losing face is a serious business. So as you know, China has quietly, steadily increase the pressure on the Australian economy. So I think you'll find that Australia will become, it will be in a much tougher spot in the coming months. And then if you look at Japan, I want you to know that the Chinese foreign minister just had a very successful visit to Japan. Right? And I'm telling you all this just to make a simple point. It's very complex. It's not black and white.
Right.
And certainly in the case of the Biden administration, if the Biden administration doesn't want to be, Martin Wolf said in the Financial Times that the Biden administration could be an interlude between two Trump administrations, unless Biden fixes the problem. And the United States of America is the only major developed country where the average income of the bottom 50% has gone down over a 30-year period. And as I explained in my book, As China Won, I devote a whole chapter to it. The United States has become a plutocracy. So the United States is a very unhappy country. And Biden is going to focus on the internal economic development of United States. And if he can work with the second largest economy to do it, I think he may or may not do it, depending on various factors. But Americans will go by where their interests lie. And as you know, the best thing that United States could do for India is to restore the generalized scheme of preferences that Trump took away. That did a lot of damage to Indian economy.
Right.
And restore the H-1B visas that were suspended for India, right? So, and why did even though Donald Trump is a friend of India, why did he do that? It proves my point. Countries will go with their own interest. Friendship means nothing.
So if the US and China, if the Biden administration believes that it must reach out to China, then what happens to other members of the Quad, like India, for example?
Well, I would say, each member of the Quad will be working out its own long-term relationship with China in one way or another. And so I don't think, I mean, again, you know, the Australians sent soldiers, and they were very, they must say the Australians are very brave people. They went to fight in Europe in World War One. They went to fight in Europe in World War Two, right? And because they feel this cultural affinity with the British and the Europeans. Now, let's say if there's a conflict in South Asia, would Australia come to fight in South Asia? Very unlikely.
No.
Very unlikely. So, and I think, and also vice versa, you know, if there's a conflict between Australia and someone, I'm not sure whether India will go in, you know, because countries have to decide where their interests lie. And I think the one small suggestion I have is that when it comes to geopolitics, Indians get very emotional. Don't get emotional. Please, please never get emotional.
What do you think we get emotional about?
Oh, everything. Like your relations with China, you get very emotional. Why don't you sit down and do cold calculations on how you can use this relationship to your advantage rather than to your disadvantage? Because, you know, there are various Indian strategic thinkers like Kautilya and all that. And what do they emphasize? You've got to be brutally cold and calculating in what you are doing and figure out the best thing to do. And so then come out with various options and don't get emotional about it.
So Kautilya is a favorite philosopher these days. In your view, what do you think India should do now? Or what do you think Prime Minister Modi's government should do?
Well, I think the number one, the big game today is no longer military. The big game today is economic. And the countries with the largest economies will have the largest amount of influence. And let me give you one statistic, which every Indian should know. In the year 2009, 10 years ago, the size of the retail goods market in China was $1.8 trillion. The size of the retail goods market in the United States was $4 trillion, 2009.
Right.
More than double China's retail goods market. Fast forward 10 years, 2019, China's retail goods market had gone up to $6 trillion, 3 times in 10 years. The United States went up to 5.5. The retail goods market in the United States now is smaller than China. 10 years from now, China's will be much bigger than the United States. Now, look at all the 191 other countries in the world, leaving aside United States, China, India. Out of 190 countries, the 190 member states in India. If you are one of the members of the 190 countries and you are looking to grow your economy, the best way to grow your economy is to find the biggest market in the world and go and sell your goods. And that's how China succeeded. China used the United States market, which was far bigger than the Chinese market, to grow its economy. And today, lots of other countries, including Vietnam, they are all using the Chinese market to grow their economies, right?
Right.
And so you see, and so the game. So to compete in this game, India must grow its retail goods market to be one of the biggest in the world. That's the game. No, it's not about how many aircraft carriers you have, how many jet fighters you have. That's not the nature of the game anymore. It's about the size of your retail goods market.
So last question, Professor Mahbubani. We're in a sense with the Biden administration now in power. You have sort of various centers of power. You have Washington, D.C., you have Beijing, India, of course, much, much smaller. But would you say that this churning that there is once again going to be another churn? And how do you see this play out? For example, in South Asia, China is expanding its influence, with Nepal and Sri Lanka, Pakistan, of course. They're very, very close. But how do you see this journey play out?
Well, I would say in South Asia, I would recommend that Indians should read my book, The ASEAN Miracle. And I see that quite seriously, okay, very, very seriously. Because the level of trust in Southeast Asia among the Southeast Asian countries in the 1970s was the same as the level of trust between India and Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, and India and Sri Lanka, whatever it is. Very relatively low levels of trust. But we built it up through ASEAN. So I believe that the best way, for example, Singapore is not worried that China is building a railway between Jakarta and Bandung. It's okay.
But you don't have the problem of cross-border terrorism that India has from Pakistan. That's a big issue, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Of course, it's a big issue. I completely agree with you. And terrorism is completely unacceptable. But again, it's a question of there's a vicious circle here, and we got to transform the vicious circle. And that Indonesia carried out a policy of confrontasi against Singapore and Malaysia. The Indonesian Marines set off bombs in Orchard Road in Singapore that killed Singaporeans. So we did have a terrorist attack from Indonesia. But after that, we settled and we worked out our relationship. And today, the level of trust within Singapore and Indonesia is amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. And look at Singapore. Singapore is this anglicized, English-speaking country full of Chinese, 75% Chinese. Indonesians distrust the Chinese, right? They don't like the Chinese community. Guess what? Indonesia and Singapore are very good friends. So in Indonesia and Singapore, which are so different, and I can apply that, by the way, to Indonesia and Malaysia or Thailand and Singapore.
How do India and China regain a sense of trust that existed before the Ladakh crisis?
Well, I would say both sides have to work at it. And I would say that I spent 33 years in diplomacy. And the one lesson I learned from diplomacy is that you must learn to talk to your adversaries. And I can tell you, I had shouting matches. Shouting. I used to shout at the Vietnamese ambassador to the UN, and the Vietnamese ambassador used to shout at me when we were fighting each other over Vietnamese occupation of Cambodia. Then the occupation of Cambodia ended in 1990. 5 years later, we brought Vietnam into ASEAN. So I want to emphasize that you can have a relationship of great adversity and overcome it. That's why I come to Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is a miracle. It's amazing. Right. And we've shown the way. And how did we do that? You know something? It was because Lee Kuan Yew and Suharto met face to face. And you could not have two individuals who were so far apart in their mindset. Lee Kuan Yew was an anglicized, British-trained lawyer. His mind was completely Western. Suharto his mind was set in Hindu mythology, right? Javanese through and through. He didn't speak English. So this Javanese Hindu mind could interact with his anglicized British mind and come together by talking to each other. So never, never give up talking to your adversaries. Never.
On this note, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, hopefully Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping will once again pick up the phone and perhaps talk to each other, and we can resolve all this crisis that that's been taking place on Indian territory for the last several months. But thank you so much for your time and for this interview. Thanks again.
I hope this is helpful to India. And by the way, as you know, I come from India.
Of course, your Sindhi name gives you away, Professor. So
And I'm eating Sindhi papar now. Thank you.
thanks again.